It's a pleasure to be able to have this opportunity for you to be able to share with us in Australia and even the world some of your thoughts on various areas. Australia has been on a journey to become one territory again after almost 100 years, being two. There's been much prayer and visioning, and there's a lot of work to get us to this starting point.
Yeah.
So now that we're at the starting point, from your perspective, what do you think the Salvation Army and all its layers needs to do from this point on?
I showed up in Australia 2 years ago to announce on behalf of the International Army the coming together of the two territories, Australia One. And I was intrigued at that particular point with regard to the possibilities that were being presented with two territories coming together, one nation, one voice, one Salvation Army, moving forward together. I think being here for this event, and to actually launch, I want to say to Australians particularly that this is the beginning of something absolutely incredible. I believe it's God ordained, so that means it will be God blessed. And if Australians, officers, soldiers, engage, put their shoulder to the wheel, I think we see in the future a stronger, vibrant, growing Salvation Army for the betterment of this nation.
Which is great to have that vision and hope for us.
Yeah.
Is there anything practical that, if I'm a Salvation Army soldier, which I am,
Yes.
What's going to be different for me?
I believe that at the heart of the Salvation Army is its mission. Across this territory, there are so many dimensions of mission which will enable all of the Salvation Army to share and enjoy and be a part of to such an extent that pathways towards faith will get created. And the whole Salvation Army benefits when we're engaged in God's mission.
Yeah.
So as a soldier, I would want to find my place in that. I would want to be on the winning side, as it were. And I would want to be a part of every opportunity given through what we do to create a sacred encounter for the countless Australians who will come through our doors. I'd want to be in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of partnerships with corporations and donors and our volunteers.
Yeah.
They are also excited about wanting to be involved. Is there any clues of how they could be feeling more of it as well?
I think they're going to want a strong army for this. I have heard since being here in Australia that Australia needs the Salvation Army. In our social justice initiatives, in our very practical helps, in our intersection with people when they're facing difficult times. Australia has that. We get to be a part of that, and we get to do it through our Christian ethos, which takes us into the path of intersecting people with regard to faith and prayer and other such things. Great opportunities ahead. Many
of the roles that our Salvationists used to do are now having to be done professionally, even dealing with people in some of the social areas.
Yeah.
What do you think is the role for the soldiership and the friends and adherents of the Army in the future?
I think we'd hire all of our soldiers and just deploy them. I think it's great. I don't have any difficulty with the fact that Salvation Army officers will always be needed, covenanted, ordained, and equipped to serve as clergy in the Salvation Army. And we still need our soldiers to be called people of God. But we also need people who can come alongside us with expertise and professionalism that we don't necessarily have within those two groups that I've just referenced. What is really neat about that, in my view, is that many people choose to work with us because they believe in our message.
Yes.
They believe in our mission. And I'm absolutely excited as an international leader that around the world and in Australia, there are countless people who are finding their vocational calling by working with us in advancing the gospel, in advancing the mission. I'm not the least bit intimidated by that or challenged by that, because I think that together, all of that mixed in together, officership, soldiership, employees, volunteers, friends, we're all making possible the mobilization of the Salvation Army in our communities, in our nation.
It's fabulous. And as you said, in our communities and in our nation. And is that the role of a Salvationist Christian, to actually make a difference in the community?
I sure hope so. Salt and light is just that. And I said earlier this morning in a setting that I was in, I hope that Salvationists, 20,000 plus of you, Salvos, will actually take seriously that you have a responsibility to make a difference in this nation.
Yeah. And you mentioned officers are needed. Officership is changing a lot as well. Yeah. Why would someone want to be an officer?
I want to start again. If that answers you, I'm already converted. I'd be an officer all over again. Yeah. Look, the Salvation Army is one instrument through which a person can serve. I think when calling becomes a reality and you're around the Salvation Army, you're connected with the Salvation Army, often God connects your calling with the Army itself. And many of us find ourselves serving. I believe that if I wasn't serving in the Salvation Army, I'd be serving somewhere. Because I think every Christian has to figure out where they serve.
Yeah.
Officership and that whole calling piece is beautifully nuanced and worked out with the Salvation Army for me. I believe that's so for many others as well. And I think in the age in which we are living, Salvation Army officers are taking a different place than we did when I began 41 years ago. We are very much community-centric. We are very much aware of social issues and social needs. We ought to be fronting up and saying hello to our MPs and influencing how they react around tables of policy and so on. But still, we have to preach on Sunday.
Yep.
We still have to get by the bedside when somebody's sick or dying. We still have to do the traditional pastoral care of people. Yeah. So all of that mixed in together, you want variety in life, join the Salvation Army, become an officer, see what happens.
Absolutely. And you talk about the politicians there and see your local member. One of my roles has been government relations, and in my talking to them, they want the local Salvation Army people to engage with them. They
sometimes we find that a little bit difficult to do. We're not used to moving in those circles. But I've found when I've found the courage, you're welcomed in very nicely, and people want to hear what the Salvation Army has to say because it has street smarts. It has understanding of what's going on in the community. So tell me what you know.
There's a lot involved in being a soldier. You're promising a lot. Yes. Has there been any thought in recent times to look at the Soldiership's Covenant, Soldiers' Covenant and review it? And again, why would someone really want to sign up to be a soldier?
Yeah. I think there are systemic problems with how we've presented soldiership. Yes, to the first part of the question, soldiership is being looked at in its presentation. The orders and regulations for soldiers is being written into a modern-day context. It doesn't take away from the conduct and lifestyle and all of those kinds of important pieces that shape soldiership, but they have to be relevant for today. For me, growing up in the Salvation Army later in life, because I wasn't a Salvationist at the beginning, I was a fast-track soldier, if you like. I came in very quickly. But in later years as a Corps officer, soldiership was often shared. This is what you do to join a band or to serve in the Corps. You have to be a soldier. I don't quite view soldiership in the same way anymore. I really believe that soldiership is a service-connected relationship with the Salvation Army. If it is, then it has to be a calling to service, a calling to soldiership. It's not mandatory. You don't have to be a soldier to be a salvo.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So we don't want to lessen the significance of soldiership. Personally, I would lift it. I would ask young people, do you want to serve in this way? Do you sense God calling you to serve as a soldier in the Salvation Army? And let it be.
Yeah.
And that's a faithfulness, that's an obedient faith, and we take it from there.
Yeah, because there has been an opinion expressed in our Others magazine by someone, let's lower it to just be a Christian. And
sorry, not on that page. I did read the article. I'm not on that page. I'd lift it. I'd make it something quite significant for our young people who want to identify with something worth living for or even dying for. It's a cause. It's a calling. If God's calling me to that, don't dumb it down.
So the role of women in the Salvation Army in Australia and everywhere, I know, but in Australia it's vital. They make up 60% of our congregations overall. And how can we fully utilise their gifts and their abilities, especially in leadership in all the different levels, in core and social areas and leadership?
I think that's a very active conversation, one that's been around the Army without a lot of acknowledgement or action.
Yep.
That's not to cast a dispersion on anyone who's preceded me. It's just to say that today, the age that we are living in, I just don't think we're going to be able to acknowledge our numbers without giving opportunity for our ladies to take their place. That statistic of 60% is international. It is particularly daunting when you look at our 17,000 active Salvation Army officers, that a very large number of those, more than 50%, are female, and a very large number of that group are indeed married officers. And we have, on some fronts and in the public forum, been viewed as an organization, as a church that's given a place to women. But I'm sitting here today fully acknowledging that what we have done is mere pittance compared to what we should do if you look at the averages.
Yeah.
It is not good enough. We do not have a proper number of women leaders, officers, trained and in position comparative to the force that we have available.
Yeah.
We are still a male-dominated army, which we have to face and deal with and change.
Yeah, and it's interesting we're male-dominated in leadership areas when only 40% roughly of our attendees are Salvation, are men. You know, it's a struggle.
I mean, literally, the International Army is putting the general in a terrible position. You're asking me to choose leaders in some regard from a very small sector, because not all of the 40% of men are leaders. Right? So I'm getting lower and lower as far as the numbers from which I pull from to staff the International Salvation Army. And because of certain ways we have worked and ways in which we have not provided equal opportunity for training, many of my ladies are not accessible to me as an international leader.
Yeah.
We have to change that.
Yep. So, General, there's much discussion around in the community concerning the church and the LGBTI community itself. Have you anything encouraging that you could help us as the Salvation Army to how do we engage in this area?
Yeah. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that groups, churches like the Salvation Army, many of us exist in a context where we're struggling with this particular issue. The extreme of the struggle is how inclusive can we be? Same-sex marriage, opening up sacred membership realities, officership, and it's not at all possible to be that inclusive at this point. I think my concern for salvation is that we have yet to fully understand among ourselves how we actually feel about somebody who, for whatever reason, seems to be different than us. When I talk about inclusion, I'm starting at the very beginning where I'm asking Salvationists to welcome people into worship, into relationship, to understand, to listen to, and to be very dismissive about judgmental thoughts when we approach one another. The pain and the hardship that we've imposed upon those communities of people is absolutely wrong. We should not, as the Salvation Army or anybody else for that matter, be party to that, be anywhere lined up with that. If there are things we don't understand or if there are things we are uncertain of, we have to engage in dialogue. And already today, I've heard a challenge from your own IMASIC people about the interpersonal possibility of being in dialogue with each other to understand. So I was asked on the internet the other day, what's my position on LGBTQ people? Oh, that's not a sensible question. I don't have a position on anybody in the world. I know that Jesus died for the whole world. And I've got to figure out how that application of grace, mercy, and love is made available to everyone. In areas where I become a stumbling block because I can't find my way through that, that's my problem. And I want the Army to engage in dialogue to such a degree that that problem becomes less and less a reality. It's no different in Australia than it is in other parts of the world. We haven't learned to talk to one another of how we feel.
One of the wonderful things for me is when we've been going through a lot of this debate in Australia, I've heard back from so many of our social centres where people have said, well, what's all the debate about? You guys just care for us anyway.
Yeah.
You help us. You don't discriminate against us.
We forget that most days.
Yeah.
We forget that most days. We forget that we have shelters particularly designed to help people that are in difficulties because they are, in fact, expressing themselves in a certain way, in a certain gendered way, and so on. So we demonstrate it. And there's no such thing as positive exclusion. But the church struggles with some of the internal things of same-sex marriage and leadership in the church and those kinds of things. We haven't got that all sorted, and there will be a time yet. But I go back and say, let's talk to each other about what we do understand, what we can do, what we can be as a Salvation Army that welcomes everyone.
For those who do call the Salvation Army their spiritual home, how would you encourage them to stay close to Jesus Christ so they can keep on track?
Be obedient. Get involved in the mission of God in the world. I fear that we have too many, oh dear, I'm going to say it anyway, so I'll say it out loud. We have too many spectators. Too many people that enjoy the fellowship of the Army, the ambience of the Army, the belonging to the Army. We need an army that's on the move. We need an army that's a praying army, that's an engaging army, and an army that's quite comfortable with costly compassion. We need an army that creates those sacred spaces in the midst of a not-so-sacred world where people can actually understand who Jesus is and what he could mean to them. I'm transformed. That's not for me. That's for me to be a witness of that transformation to the rest of the world.
That's a great phrase, quite comfortable with costly sacrifice.
God wants to use us, that's the bottom line.
How do you think the Salvation Army is embracing young people and emerging generations?
Not well enough. I think we know of an army of past days where our focus on children and young people, youth, was much more clearly defined than it is today. I look around the international army and even in places where we're bursting, Africa or Asia, we still have some real challenges as to how well we're doing because I watch the numbers and our engagement, our care for. So in the General's call that will be a little more expressed to the International Army in January of this year, there is in the call under the heading, Take Responsibility, a call to the Salvation Army to find its place in the care and nurture for children and young people and to position ourselves to embrace emerging leaders today. Our failure in this area will point to a weaker, lesser army in decades to come.
So on a more personal note, how do you manage your own spiritual life each day and what development have you had to do within yourself so that you you are where you are now in that relationship with Jesus?
I recognize my absolute dependence upon God, frankly. Some people look at the general and wonder how he manages all of the things that a general must be managing. I say by the grace of God. In my prayer time in the morning when I have private time with the Lord, just a little bit down my prayer list is thank you, Lord, for all the people who pray for the general today. Starting with, can I say New Zealand?
Sure.
But then very quickly over to Australia.
We're okay with New Zealand.
You're okay with that. But I look at my map, which is embedded in my prayer list, you see, and the map says that as the sun rises in this part of the world, I've been prayed for over and over again.
Yep.
I'm very conscious of that. I am bolder because of that. And quite frankly, I really believe that it's the prayers of God's people that hold up my arms.
Yeah.
I speak multiple times every weekend. And I really believe the inspiration comes from that interchange of personally staying in the center of God's will, but knowing the prayers and the wraparound of the Salvation Army for the general.
Yeah.
It's not Brian Peddle. It's God doing what he needs to do through me. Rosie and I are very conscious of how important it is to keep ourselves in a very, very safe place in relationship with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A previous general started the worldwide prayer meeting.
There's this wave of prayer as the sun rises and as the sun sets. It just goes. The sun never sets on the Salvation Army flag. We know that.
Yeah.
But neither does it set on its praying people either.
Yeah. What is it that you'd like to leave them with? Right.
I think I would say I so long for an Australian Salvation Army that is making such an impactful difference day by day by day, that the whole world would notice what's happening in Australia, because Australian Salvationists, Salvos, have simply said yes to God. And that means there is nothing impossible. That means we notice when he's doing a new thing amongst us, and it means that we've got obedient faith and it's in him.
Totally united as we go forward.
Absolutely.
In Australia.
Absolutely.
And worldwide.
Yes.
Thank you very much, General Brian Peddle, for giving us this time in your very busy schedule.
Bless you.